or do we sit?
Stand.
So one person, a few people started saying, we stand. Of course. The other says, no, the custom here is that we sit. And they go, a whole argument. Nobody was backing down. Finally, they said, let's go to the oldest person here in the community. He's 95 years old, and he probably remembers, he was there when we established the synagogue, so he'll know whether we stand or sit. So they go to him, knock on his door, and they go into his house. And one side says, one side said, I believe that the custom in the synagogue was always to stand, no? And he says, no, I don't think so. And the other person says, oh yeah, see, so the custom was always that everyone sat by the Ten Commandments. He said, no. He says, I don't think so either. So they said, well, that doesn't make any sense. So now all that's happening is everyone's fighting with each other. He says, yes, that was the custom. But
that's a good one.
Truth be told, it's actually an interesting discussion. Do we stand or sit by the Ten Commandments? And you mentioned that we stand, and that is the custom at Beis Chabad as well in our synagogue. However, there are those who contend that we should sit. Or, more specifically, if everyone sits during the Torah readings in general, then they should sit during the Ten Commandments as well. And the question is why? Why would this opinion oppose the idea of standing by the Ten Commandments? And this really leads into a very important discussion about a general and very significant misunderstanding which can be derived from the terminology, the Ten Commandments. And it very well may be that the term, the Ten Commandments, is not only a mistranslation of the truth, but a misleading translation of the truth. Now, sometimes there are many words in Hebrew which are just lost in translation. In fact, some of the most basic Hebrew words are not translated properly. Words such as Kodesh, which we translate as holy, and Tshuva, which is, if you recall, we spoke about Tshuva and Tefillah and Tzedakah, all being mistranslated as prayer, repentance, and charity. Shabbos, all these words, many times the beauty of the message is lost in the translation. But here we have a discussion on the Ten Commandments. What is the Hebrew word for the Ten Commandments? The Aseret Hadibrot. What does Aseret Hadibrot mean? Doesn't mean Ten Commandments. The Aseret Hadibrot means
10 speeches.
The 10 utterances.
Yes.
These are the 10 utterances which we heard directly from God. That's not Aseret, that's not 10 Commandments. And now, that's not just a mistranslation, but it's also misleading, because when we use the term, the 10 Commandments, it may lead someone to believe that these 10 are the most important commandments of all. The other ones, perhaps not as important. The other ones maybe are suggestions. These are the 10 commandments. The truth is, the Torah, we know, has 613 commandments. I may have said this in we have a shul baseball team, and I play in the outfield, and my number, the back of my jersey is 613. The coach told me that when he brought it to the person who made the jersey, he says, there must be some mistake. But you don't have 3 numbers on the back. I remember one time I was at the bat, and the catcher of one of the teams at the Temple said, couldn't believe it. Some people on my team had no idea what 613 was. So when someone asks me if they don't know, I just tell them it's my batting average. 613. So there's 613 commandments. So why use the term 10 commandments? There's 613. And that's why the 10 commandments, the translation could be misleading. So much so, and this is an interesting bit of Jewish history. The Siddur which we have today was established by the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, was established beginning with people like Ezra, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Before the Siddur, before we had the established prayers we have today, what did the Jewish people pray? How did they pray every day? So generally speaking, the prayer was done, just people would express themselves. Hebrew was the spoken language, so therefore they were able to express themselves naturally in that language. But was there any organized prayer which was done daily? The answer to that is yes. There were 2 things which were said every single day. One, yes.
The Shema.
The Shema, exactly. The Shema was said.
Don't be so proud of yourself.
Well, you know that. The Shema was said not just every day, but twice a day. Because it says so. That's the one commandment we have. It says you should say these words, V'shachvecha uvekumecha, when you wake up and when you go to sleep, which is understood to be in the morning and at night. So we said the Shema. So that was the one prayer which was said. If we are to, if there's one prayer we say every day, which we can clearly say has been said uninterrupted for the last 3,300 years, it's the Shema. So when you say the Shema, you can say it knowing that for the last 3,300 years, people have been saying this prayer every single day, the very words you're saying, which is a pretty powerful thought. But there was something else which was said at the time as well, and that was the Ten Commandments. It said that every person would pray saying the Ten Commandments. The logic to it is very simple. These are the words we heard directly from God. Makes perfect sense that we should say it every single day. These are the words we heard from God. Imagine there was a child who heard only a certain words directly from their parent. It would make sense. They would repeat those words every day. These are the words we heard directly. Everything else we heard through the prophets, through Moshe. So then why did it stop? Why don't we say the Ten Commandments every day? It's not said. We say the Az Yashir, we say the song of going through the water. We don't sing the Ten Commandments. The reason it stopped is because it was stopped. The sages stopped that custom because of the very reason we just said. Because they said, if people are praying and saying the Ten Commandments every day, it leads a person, whether consciously or subconsciously, to believe these 10 are absolute. These 10 have to be kept. And as long as I keep these 10, the other ones may be less important. The other 603. So therefore, and the truth is that's not the case at all. Is Shabbos more important than Yom Kippur? One would argue maybe Yom Kippur is even more important than Shabbos. Yom Kippur is called Shabbat, Shabbaton. And yet, Shabbos is one of the Ten Commandments. Yom Kippur is not. Is respecting parents more important than kosher? Respecting parents is part of the Ten Commandments. Kosher is not. So we don't believe that the 10 are the most important mitzvahs. For whatever reason, these 10 are the ones that God spoke to us, communicated with us directly. If you look at it more deeper, the truth is it was really the first 2 which we heard directly from God. But the other 8 were given that first time through Moses directly to us. Yes?
How come we don't say 613 commandments? Takes too long.
No, we don't have all day.
Yeah. It would take very long. Besides, just to confuse things a little bit, it's not perfectly clear what the 613 are. There are differences in opinion.
That's right.
The fact that we know there are 613 mitzvahs is something we know by tradition. But if you are to go through the 5 books of Moses, and I were to ask you to find 613 commandments, you would have a very difficult time doing so. On the other hand, if you go through the oral tradition, go through the Mishnah and the Talmud, and find every statement the sages advise us to do, you'll find many more than 613. So the question is, how do we derive 613 commandments from the Torah? Using the Talmud. So we have a period of time in our history where the sages dedicated themselves to counting the 613 commandments, to enumerating what they are. Perhaps the most famous of those sages was Rambam. Maimonides has his book has a Sefer Mitzvahs, the book of the 613 commandments. Now, by and large, everyone agrees on the vast majority of what are commandments. But there are certain areas which are disagreed upon. Let me give you one of the more famous examples. Is living in Israel a mitzvah or not?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, and all of you seem to agree with Nachmanides. Maimonides doesn't bring it out. So then, you
love
have
both of them.
What's
they're
that?
They're both great.
There are many. Everyone agrees that it's holy. Maimonides agrees it's holy, but just because something is holy doesn't mean it's a mitzvah. It's not a mitzvah to wear a kippah, even though it's holy to wear a kippah. So you have so that's like one of the more critical examples of what is a mitzvah, what is not. So even the idea of saying the 613 mitzvahs, you'll have to say it according to all opinions, so it takes even longer. But that's but you still go ahead, give it a try. Anyway, in fact, speaking of the 613 mitzvahs, there's a beautiful. So we say we heard the first 2 commandments directly from God. There is a verse in the Torah which indicates that. I think we've shared the discussion of gematria. Gematria, which means the numerical value of the Hebrew letters. The words Torah, Tziva, Lanu, Moshe mean The Torah was commanded to us through Moshe. The sages point out that the word Torah, the numerical value of Torah, is how much? Taf is 400, Vav is 6, Resh is 200, Hey is 5. 400, 6, 205 equals
613.
No, 611.
611. 611. 400, 200, 6 and 5 is 11. So if you read the word Torah and count it as its numbers, it would be Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe. 611 were commanded to us by Moshe. Why 611? Because the first two were given to us directly by God. Say 613, but 611 were given to us by Moshe. Be that as it may, the Aseret HaDibros are definitely critical, the most important event that ever happened in Jewish history, the Ten Commandments. So that's when we heard and we communicated directly with God. The Kuzari was a Kuzari king. There's legend about the Kuzari king, and he converted to Judaism after he was convinced of its validity. But there's a discussion that he had with a sage, in which he asked the sage, "Why do you claim your religion to be correct? There are other beliefs as well." And the sage answered something which you may have heard. He said, "There's a critical difference between our religion and other religions." Now, let's make this point. At this point, Judaism doesn't spend time delegitimizing other religions. There's no purpose in that. That's not the purpose. But in this context, it's about what is the validity of Judaism as opposed to other religions. He says other religions are founded upon the prophecy of one person or a group of people. So you have one person who heard from God and then communicated that to the masses. The Jewish people, the beginning of the Jewish people was at Sinai. That's when we became a nation, in which several million people communicated with God. Now, how can you make such a thing up? How can you make up the fact that several million people saw something? If I were to tell you that something happened in Texas and 4 million people saw something, you would say, well, if it happened, where are those people? Why don't I hear it from them? It's impossible to make such a thing up. And it's not as if, and since that period of time, there have always been at least 1 million Jews. It was never as if you could say, well, it narrowed down to just 3 or 4 people, so we're relying on 3 or 4 people. It's always been 1 million people strong since that time. So we've never had to rely on what one person or 2 people said. We've always been going back to the fact that millions of people witnessed something. And you can't make that up. It is irrational to believe that such a thing could be made up and anyone could be convinced of such a thing. So this is what happened in the giving of Torah. We became a nation not because someone told us what God said, but rather because we heard something directly from God. And as is the tradition according to Kabbalah, every soul that would ever be was at Sinai, which is why today there is a website, a dating site called Saw You at Sinai.
Saw you?
Yep, Saw You at Sinai. In which the idea is that we're not meeting for the first time. We met at Sinai. Our first date was at Sinai, and now we're going on our second date. That's the logic to that. It's one of the big Jewish dating sites.
is?
Yeah, sure. It's not as big as the other one, like J Date. There's some bigger ones, but this is up there, sure.
Rabbi,
But you don't. I mean, you're married. You're all set.
Yeah, no, my daughter did go on J-Date.
I didn't know you looked something up. Rabbi, when we had so-called the Kabbalistic group,
Yeah.
we were told if somebody convert to Judaism, that's a proof that his soul was at Sinai.
Yeah.
That's
It's-
Kabbalistic deal?
I guess the nature of our discussion, so we go off on tangents.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, that is correct. The Talmud talks about the terminology is Gershon Eskayar.
Even the Talmud said that?
The use in the Mishnah is a Gershon Eskayar, which means a convert who converts. Which really doesn't make sense. You don't say a convert who converts, you say a non-Jew who converts, right?
Yes.
Why say a convert who converts? Because we believe that there was a sense there was a convert within them all along. They just had to convert to complete the process. There was a spark of Judaism in there all along. So that definitely leads to the truth of what you're saying. Yes.
Now, tell me if I'm wrong, that's why I'm asking this question, but when it comes to when God spoke the first 2 commandments, didn't all the birds stop chirping, all the
Yeah, because
wind
completely
stopped blowing,
silent. Completely silent, yeah.
I never heard that one before.
Yeah.
the ocean stopped moving.
Yeah, what about in the
Everything
movie?
stopped.
The movie, The Ten Commandments. That doesn't happen? I don't know. I've never seen the movie, but there's this big...
We'll have to watch it.
Is that where I picked
I
that
never heard that one.
Is that where I picked that up? I mean,
No,
it's
you're
true.
right. It says that. It says that in the
Next
Medrash.
month.
Yep, it's
Yeah,
true.
yeah.
It just in the
The whole world
midrash.
was silent. The whole world was silent.
Yes, no birds chirp, no butterflies.
Yep, we have a
no
book in our
animals,
home which
everything
we,
stopped.
for
The oceans
children.
stood still. when
Yep.
God spoke.
Can we go back one more thing about Sinai, Rabbi?
Sure.
In Torah, it says, when I read it, it said Bet Israel on this side and Bet Yaakov on that side. Why it was called Bet Israel and Bet Yaakov?
Men and women.
Well, that's what we
Beis
understand.
Yaakov v'Taged Livnei Yisrael.
Yeah, so we learned that the men were separated from women. Bet Israel
Right,
were
and,
the
Yaakov,
men.
and God actually tells Moshe first to speak to the women and then to the men.
Right.
Ko somar lebeis Yaakov v'Taged Livnei Yisrael.
That's right.
And he says, Ko tomar, which is a softer teaching, and Taged, Magid,
Tagid,
which
yes.
is like a more tougher
But you
speaking
think
to
that's
the
fair,
Jews. That's a
Leslie?
good question.
This
I'll have
guy
to get
is
back
very
to you.
soft to the ladies.
I don't
and
understand
tough
your
on the
question.
guys.
No, it's a good question. Why are the Jewish women
Anyway,
referred
we
to as
have a
Beis
little problem
Yaakov?
here.
I'm reading.
Oh, okay.
Ben
He's investigating.
and Bat.
No. Beis Yaakov and Bnei Yisrael. Beis Yaakov, the house of Jacob. I mean, one of the ways is that the Bnei Yisrael, Bnei is more masculine.
Boys, yeah.
And
Oh.
Beit Yaakov, we believe the women are the akar, the foundation of the home. Beit Yaakov, the home, it makes sense that,
Very nice. Very nice.
but it doesn't necessarily explain why Yaakov and Israel.
Very nice.
Okay, let's see. Let's talk
So-
a little
so
bit
we
about
have
the. Any other questions?
Sidur. You said the Sidur go way back to the Knesset Agdolah.
Yeah.
Really? That I didn't know that.
Yeah, sure.
That's amazing.
They're the ones who established it.
How long ago was that?
2,000 years ago.
3,000?
2,000.
2,000.
Yeah, it's probably slightly over 2,000. Yeah.
So just
That we know our Sidur is that old.
before
Oh, that's
AD
not-
and BC.
That's yours, right?
No, BCE.
Time it is, okay.
BCE.
We don't use the word AD. You can use it, no. But
But it's right around that time. I know, whatever.
what?
All right.
What
Let's,
did I say?
let's-
Did I say anything wrong?
No, I'm not that I'm aware of.
Oh, see, he's
We can say BCE, before the Common Era.
absolutely.
Sure.
You said a bad word.
All right, so let's go on to
It's
the
in every
Ten
history
Commandments.
book.
And I guess I'm going to ask
You want
what's
me to know?
in Yiddish is something called a klutz kasha. For the term of klutz. Klutz
Klutz?
kasha. Klutz. Klutz literally means a block of wood. One of the insulting words in Yiddish is calling someone a klutz. Because the klutz really
Klutz.
means a block of wood. Anyways, but a klutz kasha means is a question which is like so simple and obvious. But it's not simple and obvious. It's a question that once pointed out seems to be obvious. You know, sometimes you see something, it seems to be all good, but then when all of a sudden you point out the problem, that problem seems to be a pretty glaring problem. So I'm going to ask such a question. What is the first of the Ten Commandments?
Anochi Hashem.
Okay. What is the commandment?
I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt.
That's right.
What is the
Not
commandment?
having any other God.
That's the second commandment.
What was it, when you said?
To have one.
You're right.
God.
No, you're quoting the exact words.
No,
but
yeah,
what is
who brought you out
What's
of
the
Egypt?
commandment?
Right.
It's more of a statement.
That there is only one God. He's the only God.
Okay, so again, what? So, and therefore, what's the
I am the
commandment?
Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery.
Okay, and therefore the commandment is.
I am your only God.
To be
No
a
one has
God-
said a commandment yet. You've all been saying statements.
To be a God
Follow.
to you.
That's the second one.
Yeah.
I command you to believe in me, one God.
Ah, the commandment is to believe in God.
Right.
Okay. So the first point of this discussion is
It's so
that,
obvious.
but it
because
doesn't say that. But it doesn't say that.
It
Isn't it?
doesn't
The
say
point
that.
is, it doesn't
Yeah.
say that. It says
He made it up.
No, it says, he's right, that would seem to be the outcome, and that's the way most people understand it. But the wording is said as a statement. I am the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt. But the question really is more than
that was a
just,
trick question.
the question is not just about how it's said. So, do we all agree that generally, the understanding of the first commandment is an obligation to believe in God? Okay, so that's how most people understand it. The first commandment is an obligation to believe in God. But the truth is, and this will go take it a step further, it really doesn't make any sense for there to be a commandment to believe in God. I'll explain why.
To have no false idols.
That's the second commandment.
Okay.
What is the first commandment? It really doesn't make sense to have a commandment to believe in God. Why? Here you have, one second, think about it. God is commanding us.
Don't touch me.
God is commanding us to believe in Him. But when you receive a commandment, that means you're receiving a commandment from a commander. So the definition of a commandment is that I already accepted a commander. If I don't believe in God, then who's telling me to believe in God? If I do believe in God, then I don't need a commandment to believe in God. So the idea doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make sense for God to command me to believe in Him. Because if I'm listening to God commanding, well then I believe in the person who I'm listening to, or the being that I'm listening to. If I don't believe it, then who's commanding me? So the logic of a commandment from God to believe in God simply doesn't make sense. Because again, if you believe in God, you already believe.
I have
And if you don't believe, then who's
Except God
commanding
is the
you?
one that commanded it.
No, I have a little take.
But who's commanding you?
I have a little take for that.
You're commanding someone that you have to do. Well, if a person doesn't believe in God, then they'll say, well, who's commanding this? If a person does believe in God, then they don't need the commandment. They already believe in it.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
we were given free will.
I'm sorry?
If He give us a commandment to believe in Him, then we have no free will. We have the free will to believe or not to believe.
Okay, but it doesn't make sense to be a commandment. No, it's not, free will is just so we could choose to do the right thing. But how could there be an obligation? Imagine you're talking to an atheist, and the atheist, and you tell the atheist, "Well, God commanded that you have to believe in Him." What will he answer? I don't believe there's such a. I don't believe in that. I don't believe in that. So it can't. And if they do believe, then the commandment to believe doesn't make sense. So really,
Unless there's an or else that goes along with it.
no. But even so, who is saying the or else? If
It's
a
not-
person
it's
who
not
doesn't
there,
believe,
yeah.
they don't believe that whole statement ever happened.
I think God means it, that or else.
I understand, but God can't. So the point is, there can't be a commandment to believe. It doesn't make sense.
No, because
that
it
why
takes
it's
away
called
our
an
free will.
utterance?
So therefore, it's an utterance. It may not be a commandment
May
at all.
not be a commandment.
But if you refer back to the Talmud, she said earlier, which used the numerical value, which says 611 we heard from Moses, and 2 commandments we heard from God, implies that this is a commandment. That the first two commandments, obligations, not because of 10, but the first two out of the 613 we did hear from God. So how are we to understand this? So there are those who say that this is not a commandment, like you pointed out. There are those who say, so how do we have the 10 commandments? There's only 9. Right? If you recall in the text, maybe there's only 9. So therefore, some of them argue and say, the second commandment can be split into 2. Because it says, first, you shall not have any other gods before me. And then it says, and do not make for yourself an image. Now, generally, we put those together and say that's part of do not have any other gods. But if we have a hard time explaining the first commandment being a commandment, and instead it's more of a statement, then we need to find 10 in the rest of in the rest of the chapter. So you find 10 by splitting the second one into 2.
And that's
By
essentially
saying there's
what-
two negative. One is do not have another God. One is do not make another image. And that's very important. You're not supposed to make an image of a human being.
and
You're
that's
not
what
supposed to make a full
Rambam did
image.
with,
I'm sorry?
That's what Rambam did, coming up with the 613.
So no, Rambam,
Because he would say,
but Rambam does include this, actually. He does include number 1, but Rambam's not the only one. There are others who say, the Sefer, I believe, is called the Baal Halachas Gedolos, who says that the belief in God is not a mitzvah. It's the foundation of all the mitzvahs. You can't begin observing commandments until you believe, but it's not one of the 613.
okay.
Others say, and this is interesting as well, they say, no, you can't split the second one into 2, but you can split the 10th one into 2. Because, for whatever reason, the 10th one says, do not covet, right? Mm-hmm. So it starts by saying, do not covet your neighbor's house. And then it starts again. It says, do not covet your neighbor's wife and all the belongings they may have. So it says, do not covet twice. So there are those who say there's 2 separate commandments there. One is about the house and one is about everything else. So those who say that there are 2 in the end. That's one way of going about it, by saying the first commandment is not a commandment at all. But I want to share another approach, which I think is a beautiful approach, in which the first commandment is a commandment, despite the question we asked. So how can it be a commandment? The answer to that lies in another question. What are the words? I am Anochi Hashem Elokecha Asher Hotzeticha Me'eretz Mitzrayim. I am the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt. Now, don't you think that if God was to introduce himself, don't you think there would be a different introduction? That would be, I am God who created the universe, right? Anochi Hashem Elokecha shebarasi shamayim va'aretz. I am the creator of everything. I mean, you're saying, I am the God who took you out of Egypt, a technicality. I am the God, what do you mean? I am the one who created everything. Everything you see, I made. That is the most God. When we think of God, what do we call God? We call God the creator of heaven and earth. That is the ultimate description of God's, accomplishments when it comes to this world. God created everything. According to Kabbalah, it goes further. He continues to create. But the point is that God is a creator. So if God was going to talk to the human race for the first time, that's what he should say. I am God who created heaven and earth.
What's heaven?
No, whatever it is. But we know in the beginning of the Torah it says, in the beginning God created Shemayim v'aretz, heaven and earth. So God should say, that's me. So why is the introduction otherwise? I am the God who took you out of Egypt. So the answer is that God was teaching a very important message. God was saying, there are many people who perhaps believe in a creator, but it's an entirely different level of belief to recognize a God who is an active participant in my life. And therefore God said to them, I can clearly and obviously say I am the God who created heaven and earth. But that's not the more important point is, I am the God. Remember, they just left Egypt a few weeks before. That was the most recent event, which had the most impactful event just recently in their lives. God was saying, that event that just happened to you, you know why it happened? Because I made it happen. And you have to believe, not that God exists, but that God is an active participant in your life. He is directing your life in a certain way. Yes, we believe in freedom of choice, but there's many things which are outside our freedom of choice. Places we land, we end up, all sorts of things which happen, which God's saying, I am directing them. So it's not about being the greatest, most accomplished God. It's about the God who is involved in your life. And therefore, what's involved in your life right now is going out of Egypt. Creation of heaven and earth, that's wonderful, but that's 3,000 years before.
Rabbi Tuvia mentioned that God is also our God of history. That's what you're saying.
I'm not sure.
We are connected in history with God.
Yes, but more than just history, my personal life.
Yes.
And if this is why God says, I am the God who took you out of Egypt, perhaps we now can understand why the first commandment could be a commandment. To command someone to believe in God, that doesn't make sense. Because either they believe or they don't believe. And by saying that God commands it, it's not going to change their mind. But God is talking to a nation of believers. God is not saying you have to believe. God is saying, you may believe in God. The first mitzvah, the first obligation is to believe. The God that you believe in, you should recognize is directly involved in your life. And that could be a commandment. To say that you may believe in God, but you have to take that level of belief to a new level. You have to raise it up to a belief in a God who is involved in your life, involved in every event that happens. There are many belief systems based on the notion that God created the world and then moves on. God's not involved anymore. That perhaps explains why the world could be so jungle-like, chaotic. But we don't believe that. We believe there's some sort of organization behind the chaos. We don't understand it. But God is involved in our life. Furthermore, another point to be made is that the wording, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, God is speaking to the Jewish nation. Now, in English, if I am talking to one person, I would say, you should, or you shouldn't. If I'm talking to 10 people, I'd say the same thing, you should or you shouldn't. But in Hebrew, there's a different wording for when you're talking to one person. I would say lecha. And if I was talking to many people, I would say lachem. God is talking to many people. God should use the Anochi Hashem Elokechem. I am your God. I am the God of the many people in front of me. Instead, God says, Anochi Hashem Elokecha. I am your God, as if speaking to an individual, which just accentuates the point we said. That God was saying, not only did I take you as a whole out of Egypt, no, you, whoever you are, Reuben, Shimon, Levi, Sarah, Rivka, Leah, I'm talking to you and saying, I took you, I was directly involved in you, the individual taking you out of Egypt. And the same applies to any specific occurrence that happens in our life. God is not the God of the Jewish nation. God is the God of me. And
Personal?
that's, I'm sorry?
I can say personal God.
Yeah. And that's the depth to the first commandment. To simply say to believe in God, again, doesn't make sense. But if you put the entire verse together, God is saying you, the individual, have to recognize it's not enough to believe in a creator. It has to be a God who's involved in you, the individual's life, and the events that happen in your life. And that's the first commandment. Now, I guess there's time for one more thought.
That's,
This, should we stop
It's
here? No, it's
complicated.
almost 10 after 8.
No, keep going, Rabbi. Don't.
Okay,
One
well,
la-
but
one-
that
We
is
don't
the-
join it.
Isn't that complicated?
You know, actually, I should
Yeah.
probably
The
stop. I
first
know my wife is waiting.
commandment?
We'll stop here. I know we got off to a late start, but I probably should get on the road because it's going to be a longer drive back too.
I just flipped over to the generally accepted Ten Commandments outside of Judaism. And the first statement is, I am Lord your God, period. Nothing
Yeah.
else. And then it goes into the first commandment, you should have no other gods before me. Okay? So it's just a small statement, I am Lord your God. Done.
Doesn't talk about taking.
Doesn't talk about anybody coming out of Egypt, nothing.
Where is this? What?
The
Oh, yeah.
generally accepted
Yes.
Ten Commandments outside of Judaism.
Yes.
You know, Christianity.
Yeah.
But the amazing part, like the Rabbi said, he's talking Elohecha, your
Yeah.
personal God.
Yeah.
What is it? I still don't know exactly what you mean by that.
It means that God spoke as if speaking to an individual, not as if speaking to the language which is used in the Ten Commandments is the language used to an individual. Not the entire.
Do you mean that he looked at all the Jews as being one individual?
Exactly. No. No. He was speaking to each and every individual.
Okay.
It's something only God could do, to speak to many people, but each individual at once.
All right.
Like Shema Israel. You don't say Shema'u, Israel. Shema means singularity. You, Bob, listen.
Yep, and that's what it says.
Shimon means
Habed et
everybody.
avicha. It doesn't say respect your parents, it says respect your father.
That's right.
Respect your father, not respect your fathers. Respect your father. Who's talking to
I
me?
don't know. I don't think anybody was from God's point of view. Maybe it sounded like each one of them was talking to just them.
No, but God has spoke many times when
In
when
singularity.
Moses spoke to Jewish people, he spoke as the many. And here God says to you, and you think you're speaking. If you want to tell 10 people to respect their parents, what would you say? Respect your fathers. You wouldn't say respect your father. Respect your fathers. You know, there's many people here, but God says no. Respect your father.
Oh, check Exodus 4:22, where it say, Beni Bechori Israel,
Right.
my son, my firstborn Israel. He's speaking about the whole people and refer to them as single persons.
Anyway, so that's commandment number 1.
So we have 9 to go.
612.
612.
Oh, that's going to take a couple of years.
All right, well, listen.
More than that.
That's why we're
Once a week.
alive, to keep on studying.
That takes 12 years.